Yes, I can. There are two important developments with regards to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. First, it's not just on track, but we are hopeful that we will have both domestic production and international imports ahead of schedule. And I think that's reassuring, reaffirming, and an important point of hope. Secondly, that their progress through the international regulators is also ahead of where I had previously understood it to have been. The results are good, and I think that's the important thing. They're early, they don't have all of the data in yet, but the results are good, and that means that we will have, subject to our Australian regulators agreeing, a safe, effective and plentiful vaccine. And we've set March as our commencement date. I'll continue to provide that, but we are ahead of schedule, and our approach is to under-promise and over-deliver, and always to make sure that not only do we have a safe and effective vaccine, but we have the strongest safety and assessment processes through what I think is arguably the best regulator in the world in the TGA.
And further to that then, Minister, the CEO of AstraZeneca, as I'm sure you're aware, claims that the COVID-19 vaccine is just as effective as Pfizer and Moderna, but the data to back this up hasn't been released, so should we be sceptical about the statement given the information is yet to be made public?
No, I've actually tested exactly those questions this morning with the global head of AstraZeneca, Pascal Soireau, and we've spoken today, and they have always sought to, in my view, set expectations lower and then to over-deliver, and I think that's a very wise approach. Our regulators are increasingly confident that the choices that we've made are likely to be backed up by regulatory approval. They're the choices of the medical expert panel, then backed and put into action by the government. And so what we're seeing is the world is likely to be in the fortunate position of having a number of vaccines that are highly effective. We are in the fortunate position of having 3 vaccines at this stage, all of which are on track to being highly effective, available, and then rolled out safely across the Australian population. Jonathan.
Minister, just with the planned rollout of the vaccine, where do teachers sit in this? Because the March timeline coincides with going back to its plan to teachers higher up in order to reduce potential spread in those environments. And secondly, the difference between the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine. Clearly there's issues around storage. The AstraZeneca one is easier and cheaper to make. The government has ordered 3 million of those compared to 10 million Pfizer. What's the justification and reasoning behind that in response to those two questions?
Well, again, the choice of vaccines and the volume of the vaccines has been recommended by Professor Brendan Murphy's panel. That includes the Chief Medical Officer, but also the heads of the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation. So, as has always been the case, the selection of vaccines is very, very much, as it should be, a matter for medical expertise. They've chosen it on the basis of what they believe will be safe and effective, and we've ordered it in the volumes that they have recommended, and that's the basis on which they have made those choices. One important consideration is that the world has never had what's called an mRNA vaccine before. Pfizer and Moderna are both mRNA vaccines. The Oxford AstraZeneca is a viral vector vaccine, and the Novavax is a protein vaccine. And so there are 3 different vaccines, and the mRNA is, however, new and not previously used for any form of communicable disease on all of the advice that I have. So that's why they've approached that on the basis that they have. And I think the latest advice will be very, very good news for Australians, that Pfizer is progressing well, Oxford is progressing well, and whilst we await more data on Novavax, the last advice we have is that it is progressing well. It's likely that Pfizer will have the first of the approvals in Australia on the latest advice from the TGA, and we've been working with them and signing the final agreement on distribution, and we'll begin with whichever vaccine has first approval and delivery. The Oxford vaccine, we're expecting 3.8 million units in Australia before the end of February, with production of the first batch in Australia already complete, and now it goes to what's called the fill and finish. So if you think of it as the production and then the bottling, as it were, or the fill and finish, to use the formal term, is the next phase, and both of those are slightly ahead of schedule, and I think that's positive. Anything else, Jonathan?
Yeah, but just on the teachers' question, is there any proposal consideration for teachers higher up to reduce the risk of spread in those environments of tightly closely knit groups?
Sure. So the medical expert panel has provided the early guidance, and that is that it will be, not surprisingly, as has been the case around the world, we begin with our health and medical workers, with our elderly aged care residents, and in particular as well with the frontline workers in the quarantine scheme. That's where the risk of spread is deemed to be the greatest. They will then provide further advice on subsequent rounds, and so I won't preempt that, but we'll continue to follow whatever is the medical expert advice, as we do with other vaccines. Chloe.
Thank you, Minister. Just quickly, as the CEO of AstraZeneca, his phrase in the headlines in the UK was, they've got a winning formula. Based on your briefing to the CEO this morning, do you agree? Is it a winning formula?
I do think that with AstraZeneca and Pfizer, we have two of the vaccines that will be most readily available and widely available, safe and effective. And after that, Novavax is also looking very good. So I would put it this way. The advice from AstraZeneca is of great hope for Australians, and the advice from the regulators is of great hope regarding both the early vaccines, Pfizer and AstraZeneca. In short, I think it will be a good new year for Australians, but I also think it will be a safe and healthy new year for Australians. Anything else, Chloe?
You've mentioned a couple of times, not only today but in previous press conferences, ahead of schedule, well on track. Is there any likelihood that we would see the vaccine rolled out earlier than March?
Our guidance remains March, and our approach is to under-promise and over-deliver. We are in the hands of the data. So what drives the time frame? Really, there are three elements. We have to have the data, which comes from the international clinical trials, and we're expecting the final data in late January from both of the leading candidates. Then we have to make sure that we actually test the physical stock, and plans are underway to do that. That's a 14-day process. It's not something that has necessarily been done in other countries that are facing a life-threatening emergency of hundreds or thousands of lives lost per day, but it's something which the regulator absolutely recommends for Australia, to say that we would release batches without having done that 14-day safety test of the actual batch is not something they're recommending, and not something we would ever want to bypass in Australia. And then finally, there is the distribution. But all three of those, they are ahead of schedule. So the simple answer is we'll stick by our March timeframe,